Hi everyone. For the first time on the Stars and Startups podcast, I have two guests. It was a lot more complex than I expected, but I think we did quite well to pull this off. Conversing with the co-founders of the contemporary co-working pioneers in India, 91 Springboard, was extremely enjoyable. Guess that's just the Goa vibe. I chat with Varun Chawla and Anand Vemuri about the co-working business, how COVID is going to be a catalyst for increased adoption of co-working. We also chat about how the 91 Springboard team has set the trend among businesses that move their headquarters to Goa. The advantages of building a remote team. They also share some tips on creating an environment for a remote team's success. And don't forget, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast or YouTube channel if you haven't already done so. And you can also sign up to the Substack newsletter to stay updated on what's happening on the Stars and Startups universe. Okay.
Thank you for having us. We have Varun and Anand of 91 Springboard here today with us to chat about the 91 Springboard journey, moving to Goa with their teams, and a lot more fun things that is happening around the current situation. So, hey guys, what's happening in Goa? What's keeping you busy?
All right. So it's Saturday. We're in the office, and for the first time in a long time, it feels good to be in the office on a Saturday. Right? So things in Goa are good. Obviously, with the virus situation and stuff, there was a lockdown here, but we're seeing how things are getting back to normal, and people are normal is an overstatement, but getting to a closest approximation of normal, right?
Yeah.
So it just feels good to actually be doing something again, right? We were obviously working from home for all this time, but the interaction was missing, and we've always been a fairly community-driven and tight company, So it's good to to be back at work and actually see other people.
You know what's interesting for 100%. What's interesting for me is most companies, tech companies, can think of themselves as saying, you know what, we're building product. We don't need to actually have a physical location, and we could sit at a co-working space, at home, at a coffee shop, anywhere else, right? How do guys in the co-working space business think about that?
So the space, honestly, so it serves more functions than just infrastructure, right? So even before, it's like if you go back to February, about 25% of our members were part-timers, single person. About 25% were team size of 4 or smaller, right? Who typically have the option of working from coffee shops or working from home and so on. But many of them, they were in the space for a reason, right? Because the infrastructure side, there's also this. I've done contract work before and so on, and you get fried at home after a while, right? So there's the sense of community, there's the sense of separation of after you've worked in your pajamas all day, it gets old after a while, right? So the sense of separation of, there's some structure in my life. I leave home and then I go work somewhere, and there's a discipline that comes with that, and then I come back home, right? So different people have different reasons. Obviously, a lot of that's going to change, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later in the show. But it's never been a challenge for us, right? We've tailored for that. We have, we always had almost a quarter of our customers who thought that way even before this. So if it's going to become like 70% overnight, that's not an issue in the long term, right? Short term, of course, there's a lot of other stuff going on.
And riffing off what Anand's saying, my personal experience here, so not the tech entrepreneur, but I think it'll vibe with a lot of those folks too, is that most of us are in smaller spaces, especially in the bigger cities. We've got a lot of folks and as an example, I had 6 people through most of this lock-in, 6 adults, and I was in a 3-bedroom apartment, and we didn't have enough space to be able to do a conference call. I would not be able to have one room to myself, basically. So there was no way I could peacefully do one. and then you ride on top of that internet issues and infrastructure challenges, power outages, those sorts of things. I think it's a possibility, but if all your stars line up, and that doesn't seem to happen. So I think for most people, you could work for a couple of hours, you could work maybe for a couple of days, but you can't just permanently work from home. You do need to get out somewhere. Of course, there's the mental state of well-being, but there's all this infrastructure and just need for space, real world challenges, right? So I believe co-working or a similar second place is required for a person to be able to manage their home and work life. Not going to be able to do that all at home.
Since we touched on the topic of COVID already, so let's just bring this up, right? Then in that case, are you looking at the space as some place that they could come? Because I believe there's going to be a distributed office going forward, right? At least in the near term, which is what I'm hearing and reading, is that folks are saying, you know what, we may not ask people to come back to the office because anyway you can only have 30%, 40%, kind of capacity, etc. If you want to do social distancing, etc., and so on. So how does a co-working space solve for
that? So it's going to be different at different points of time, right? And also every city is different right now, So the next 3 months, I think, are going to be tough either way, right? Even in cities that have a relatively low number of cases, people want a sense of comfort that, okay, it's going to be like this for the forthcoming future, right? So 3 months, I think we'll see, some people using the space. Social distancing will be important. Safety measures are first and foremost, right? So we're not going to be doing any community activities for like the next 3 months, at least physically, right? I think what's more interesting is longer term, right? So right now, safety concerns come first and foremost. That will dictate whatever it is. Are you using the office, not using the office? How many people are using it? So safety is the first reason on anyone's mind, right? I think what's interesting is what will come after that, right? Because once the safety concern lifts, then you start thinking, okay, how did that work for me? Did I face problems? Does the office make sense? There's pros and cons, right? There's productivity cost, all kinds of things, right? And it's been interesting talking to our customers because they are all over the place, right? There's people who are like, this sucks, my business is not running, I need to get back to the office like tomorrow. And then there's the hybrid crowd, and then there's the distributed or remote, right? And all of them see some role for a workspace or part-time or full-time. But the formats are very different, right? So one of our challenges is to figure out what that future looks like and build for that, right? So.
When you say the format would be different, one of the things that I'm hearing is the fact that you could send their work from home kit. I don't understand what that means. Have you guys thought about this? Like, what's the story here?
Yeah, so we've the story here basically is that working from home has its own infrastructure challenges, right? Internet connections, furniture. Many people don't even have a desk at home, right? So just that, and this is typically procured by corporates, right? Your individual doesn't have a lot of experience in, hey, how do I set up a router so I can access my company's VPN or whatever, right? So most work from home kits, where we've also been working on one, right? So we've taken a two-pronged approach. One is where individuals are looking for something. We connect them with someone, right? Your typical B2C customer doesn't have the B2B connections, right? So if they want an internet connection, we can connect them with the right offering at Airtel or whatever, right? And then with some of our larger customers and larger clients, it's somewhat more, how do we work with the company to make sure all the employees get what they need, right? So for us, it's very early days. We've actually only reopened our spaces 2-3 weeks ago, so it's fairly early. Yeah.
So there is infrastructure, which is hardware,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like you're saying, there's the routers, there is the desk, the laptops, the
Yeah.
screens, and so on, which is kind of what
Yeah.
comes with your office, which is the investment that any office would do. And then there is the other aspect, which is softer, which is maybe a nice room, a quiet space, a comfortable meal at home, and whatever else. So, are these guys looking at it from two separate angles? Because I was talking to the founder of CEO of Ixigo. They had shipped everybody laptops, right, and screens and everything else. I know a startup that basically said, okay, we're going to get your comfy office chairs dropped off at your house, right, so that you can be comfortable and you can work. So they feel like that's sufficient, but obviously there's a lot more to it, right?
So some of this we were already doing, right? So we've always been a space that has these community activities, and this also acts as a platform for people to access resources from other companies, right? So what we're in the process of, it isn't launched yet. What you'll see soon is translating some of that into a remote world, right? Where some of these softer things that you've talked about, right? Whether that's even connecting with other people or accessing, advice or feedback from a peer group, right? That's something we've always done, but how do you translate that into a remote and virtual setting, right? That's something we are working on right now. Right?
Is that the future? Is that where you'll be able to add a lot of value? Actually, before we get into that, what is NITI Springboard? Because a lot of the things you just mentioned, I think comes as part of that, right? I think we can probably segue into what is NITI Springboard, how do you guys come together?
8 years ago, we were trying to be an accelerator or an incubator. YC was an inspiration, and we wanted to try to work with younger startups, raise a little finance, and invest and wait out the 4 or 5 years to return, right? The typical accelerator model. Unfortunately, we were unable to raise any funds, but we had planned for a physical workspace also, because like 500 startups, we felt if we had a smallish fund, we could invest in the company and then provide a number of services and create that secondary cash flow mechanism for survival, right? So that was the thought. What ended up happening was we got the space, that got running, a number of folks came in, started working out of there, they started paying us, and all of that started to come together within 6 months of launch. But the fund, even a year after launch, sort of did come together. And we sort of had this moment where we said, hey, there's something under our noses that's working. And there's something that we're aspiring to do. Is it time we pivot? And I think about 18 months into our journey, we bit the bullet. We had Deepak, who I just told you, is the most senior co-founder. He sort of said, hey guys, this is working, double down on this, let's scale this. And he came in with $1 million, and so he put his money where his mouth was, and we ran with it.
The one thing that's been constant from that and did carry over even through the pivot is that our goal wasn't just to provide infrastructure and that's it, right? Our goal from day one, we were always thinking along the lines of what are their needs? They're all running businesses. What are the problems they're facing? How do they solve them, etc. Right? And some of those are logistical issues, like I need a payment gateway kind of stuff. And some of those are advice and peer group related things, right? So we've always kind of built out this platform where these things can happen, right? One of the things that was great about working in the same space is you have that immediate feeling of community, and it's like your college days, right? College is the last time for most people that they actually belong somewhere, right? So very collegial, friendly, collaborative atmosphere, right? And over time, that's built out. We had 14,000 members, as of March, and
this is across how many locations?
Across 27 locations. Yeah,
14,000 members across 27 locations. And the community feeling, I think, is also a very important aspect, right? When you're looking at 2-3 member team, it can get lonely in a way because you're just seeing the same 3 faces, 4 faces, because that's how small some teams are. What we forget, a lot of the time is that SMEs, MSMEs in this country, that includes startups, are quite small until they actually hit their stride.
Yeah. So absolutely, so that is one of the reasons why a lot of freelancers and small companies have always come to us. In fact, our first few years, we only had the smaller teams, right? So that's what I meant by this, acting as a platform for these smaller teams to also connect with each other, and as a platform where the smaller team can access some big company resources, right? Where a small team would not be able to get certain products or certain pricing, right? We try to arrange for that, right? And that's what was working quite well, in physical spaces. And some of it is easily translatable into a more remote kind of world. Some takes a little bit more work, and we're doing that work right now.
So. When in 2012, 2013, I know that WeWork was extremely, it had a very cult-like following in the US, at least with the startups that were housed inside of WeWork. When we started Live Dojo in 2013, Chris basically set up his office at a WeWork, and he would tell me, because we used to do a lot of video calls, like, man, this is amazing, just like what's happening. There was a lot of excitement. And he was translating that excitement from the US to where I was sitting. You guys started around the same time, maybe a year and a half after, but I don't think WeWork was a phenomenon by then. Was that ever, kind of an influence on this? Because they have the same community-oriented kind of approach. They have the same kind of, kind of funda in terms of how they want to work with startups and others.
So in our initial days, I wouldn't say we were aware of even WeWork. We started off actually wanting to be a YC, right? And so the initial days was wanting to be an accelerator, wanting to work closely with entrepreneurs, understanding their journey and facilitating that process. In our later years, once we had decided we were a co-working company and we were going to scale that path, of course, we became more aware of WeWork. We've even interacted with them at multiple levels, the Indian team, the overseas team, and learned many things from them. I think they've done great things on both the infrastructure, and personally, I feel some of their community essence got diluted as they scaled. I do believe when they started, they were doing some amazing things, and we've also heard many of those stories, read about those stories. But it feels like in 2020, it's not the same community that they were building in 2012. Fundamentally, they take larger spaces. Their average space is above 50,000. Our average today is between 25 and 30,000 square feet. They have spaces as large as 200,000 square feet. So they take larger spaces. They fit out at a higher premium. I think it's almost 2 times what we spend on the fit outs. And then they charge between 50% to 200% more than what we do. So they have larger spaces, almost always in CBDs or what would be considered premium locations also. So that's where they're a little bit different than us, because they've gone after the premium enterprise segment who can afford the higher rental, the higher fit out that gets loaded into the membership fee. And that's their customer and that's the product they want. We, as we said, originally were a startups company that expanded to supporting SMEs and freelancers, and subsequently catered to some aspects of enterprise customers who we think are more value-oriented. And our spaces tend to be a bit smaller. They tend to be not maybe in the heart of BKC, as an example. We wouldn't have a building there. We'd have a building in what is called BKC Annex. So some of those changes are what we've made, and we'd spend on good, high quality, long lasting, durable capex, but not necessarily what would be called fancy or luxurious.
Okay, so kind of the premium locations by itself will probably impact a lot of pricing to a large extent. And I think if you're a startup and if you just wanted the community and the space, then I think the choice is quite clear, right? What they're going to choose over, a location, which probably is important for very few.
Yeah, the location is anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of the member price.
Right. What kind of revenue models are there? Because there's obviously buy and build, which maybe a McDonald's can do around the world, and then you have kind of the rev share kind of a scenario, which is what it is. You just take the space from the owner and you tell the owner, hey, we will give you a piece of the pie. Let us run the space for you, and this is how we want the space to look like. And some of the incubators follow we'll take equity from you, and they call it an incubate, and they don't charge for about a few months, and then hope that they stay on, and then they start charging them for that. Am I missing any other models that exist in the space?
There's you got the two major edges, and then this one unique model. The two edges is I'm going to pay for everything, or my partners are going to pay for everything, and there's various hybrids of I'll pay for some stuff, you pay for some stuff, right? And then you divide the kitty accordingly based on who's taking what risk and who's funding what portion, right? So you got the two edges, and there's probably a 20 different combinations that I've heard of over the years. So your ballpark is correct, and then that odd animal of I'll give you space for equity is really an odd animal. You don't see it frequently, but we have heard of it, and we very early took a call that wasn't going to work for us. Just the percentage of startup success is so low that that's an unviable model as far as.
I've been to your Rise Mumbai location, so that's a partnership that you've done with, Barclays.
Barclays, yeah.
Right? That's a quite unique kind of an offering where you've done a partnership. It's like a co-branding, right? Like Run DMC working with Aerosmith, right? What's the what is the fundamental kind of thought behind that? Like how do you guys put that together?
See, when you're a young company, you're still trying to establish product market fit. And while we believed we had some of that figured, which was running these co-working spaces for startups, we still felt there was ways we could add more value to the entrepreneur, specifically if he could bring a large corporate to the table that would engage with them and help them with resources that they had. In particular, getting through some of these large regulatory compliances or getting access to capital, getting access to a multi-million user base was something that Barclays could bring to the table. So that conversation really revolved around how could we increase our engagement and value proposition to our members. And so philosophically, because we were aligned, we were open to discovering a business model that worked for us. And it was a 3-year partnership that we did. It actually concluded in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. So it was something that we learned a lot from. Barclays subsequently had turned in both their Rise management team and their overseas management team. So their goals also changed. But fundamentally, I think aligning with more stakeholders that help in a business journey is core to what 91 Springboard believes in, and is finding different ways to continue to do that to deliver more value.
So that was primarily focused on fintechs.
Absolutely correct. That was basically Barclays' wheelhouse, right?
Right. And was that are there any other partnerships that are similar? And what kind of value? Like, how does a Barclays say, okay, this worked for us?
We do have other corporate partnerships, but they haven't taken on the same format. So we work with organizations like Amazon or HDFC or Google, and they're varied in nature. The goal is that 91 Springboard has a certain operations and an ability to execute, and if through that execution we can deliver a value to both our partner and the entrepreneur or our member, we would want to engage with them as long as it's a minimal change in how we operate. We're not a consulting organization where we build something ground up to facilitate a partner. But if our operations in their natural form are 80-90% what the partner is looking for, we'd be happy to augment 10-15%, learn a few new skills, and deliver more value to our members. That's the type of partnerships we build. So the Barclays partnership is the only one where we actually, our philosophy has always been to engage with external partners to deliver more to our members without sort of completely reinventing our operations, right? That would be a consulting company. Our goal is not to be a consulting company. Our goal is to leverage our operations, maybe making augmentations 10-15%, which is long term good for the partner and good for our members and teaches us new skills. That's how we look at the world. And in that vein, we've done partnerships with organizations like Amazon and HDFC and Google, where we've delivered value to our members by learning a few new skills. We've never quite done a dual branded space again, but we found different ways to partner in achieving more benefit for our members.
That means that the 91 Springboard brand doesn't get used, right? Ultimately, then it's going to be, in this case, Rise, which is fintech.
I think about three years ago or so is when we made that decision of we would like to act as a platform, right? We're not going to do this one thing with Amazon here, one thing with them there. The fundamental thing is we have 27 locations, 14,000 members, almost 4,000 companies, many of which are startups. These companies and SMEs who are smaller, they typically don't have access, right? Because it's such a large distributed group. Similarly, some of the larger companies also find it very difficult to coordinate with them. So there are mutual needs that can be filled, though, right? These companies are looking for some of the products and mentorship and knowledge that is stored in these larger organizations. The larger organizations are looking for the innovation, and conversely, they're looking to distribute their products to these companies. And there's a matching problem, right? You can't send a sales force out in the field to meet with 500 startups a day. But we can do that because 500 startups a day come into our spaces every day, right? So starting about 3 years ago, that was the vision and that was the strategy going forward. So all our new partnerships, and Amazon and Google being the notable ones, took this format where they apply across all our spaces. All our spaces are 91 Springboard spaces, and all our members have access to this versus a single location, right? And we did also then finally, having shown the success of this, we got some support from the government as well. And we received a large grant to grow this program from the Atul Innovation Mission.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the mission and what this grant is about? Because I remember the government picked out a few operators to then go and work with startups, and also they let them write checks, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So we received this grant almost 3 years ago. And the grant, when the government put it out for applications, the people getting it are quite diverse, actually, right? Everything from a college incubator to someone like us, right? So our support is largely on two fronts, right? One is to grow out this platform that I just talked about, right? So building technology for it, bringing in people who otherwise are not in the startup ecosystem to add their knowledge, and so on. So that was one, right? Where we just make entrepreneurship and innovation more accessible, right? And that could be knowledge, it could be networking sessions. There's a whole range of activities we do under that umbrella. And the other one was what you touched on, which was writing checks into startups. So a portion of the grant is also reserved for us to write checks, not purely from a I'll get an exit 2 years from now point of view. But for us to fill a gap in the ecosystem, which is it's very difficult to find a lead investor at a seed or pre-seed, right? With those really small rounds of a crore and a half, putting the syndicate together itself is sometimes quite difficult, right? So our co-founder Pranay has been leading that, and he comes from IIM Ahmedabad's incubator, where he's had a lot of experience doing this, right? And so bringing together and cobbling together that round with our check also playing a part of that, right? And bringing some confidence to the other investors that, okay, these guys are also putting some money where their mouth is, right?
How do you decide then? I'm sure Pranay probably brings in that know-how, saying, okay, we choose to invest here because we get some, maybe a startup that could go on to occupy more seats in our spaces and add more value to the ecosystem.
No, so this is run like a proper professional fund, right? So it has, we've deliberately separated it from our space business, right? So you don't have to be a member for you to be eligible for us to consider funding you. And conversely, if you are a member, you don't get any preferential treatment, right? It's a professionally run operation with its own investment committee, on which I don't sit, for example. Neither Varun nor I are on that, right? We are focused on the space side. So it's run as a completely separate concern, which they have their objectives, and there should not be any compromise based on the rest of the business.
I've heard some disturbing stories from some of the other incubation missions, where the money gets siphoned off, and then the startups get a very small portion of the check. Even though it's only around 12, 13 lakh rupees, they still get a piece of that. Only they get a small slice of that, and then the mission itself keeps the rest. It's quite disturbing. Is that true? Have you guys?
So I haven't heard that, and I'm honestly a little surprised because the grant comes with a fairly rigorous reporting requiment and governance and audits, right?
I've never heard that. I haven't heard that, but given the ethical standards that we hold ourselves to, all of us in this organization, that's completely out of the question. And Pranay, who's been running this program, ensures every penny reaches the entrepreneur. And I think one of the things he's been extremely proud of, and we've done a pretty good job of, is that every time we've written a check, we've been able to mobilize anywhere from 5 to 10 times that amount. And that's something we've been very, very proud of, and we feel we're making a difference, right? That was our promise, to help sort of fast track the startup ecosystem. This is the Startup India, it's part of the Startup India mission, and we think we played our little bit towards that.
I hope the other scumbags, kind of can also, have similar values and actually try to deliver value, right? I mean, the reality is, as it is, startups have a hard time. And one thing that I know of NITI and Springboard, and which was talked about for a little bit of time, including a few of other startups that moved their HQ to Goa.
Yeah.
I think you guys started the trend, so to speak. Lock, stock, and barrel.
3 years?
3 years ago? 2017? 2018?
2017, if I remember. Yeah, 2017.
What triggered that? Screw this pollution in Delhi, all this manic, morning drives and commutes to Okhla.
Yeah. So Varun looked into the future and he saw that this epidemic risk is somewhere looming. Yeah.
Basically, as a group of founders, we would meet at least once a month with the intent to talk about high level challenges working on the business work instead of working in the business, right? And we just bring threads that we were seeing in each of our areas, and we just would brainstorm with each other to try to see if they were seeing similar things and if it needed action or if it was just an isolated problem, right? So in this case, Pranay actually brought this up where he said, look, he saw a number of his folks getting stressed, spending an inordinate amount of time traveling. So a lot of the things you said, getting sick frequently, and things like that. And then as soon as he brought this topic, sort of Anand and I both chimed in. We said, okay, it seems like this is not just an isolated problem. As responsible employers, as people that want to build a long-term organization with great people who will come along for all of that ride. What can we do? And we said, hey, some of these smaller, simpler places just seem to be just easier in terms of commute, lesser in terms of pollution, lower in terms of cost of living, yada yada yada. And we said, like, maybe that is what we should be looking at if we want to build a strong foundation for an organization that's still in its infancy and has got a long way to go. Let's put ourselves in a solid place, right? And we were at this point, I think, about 5 years into our 91 Springboard journey. And we said it makes sense to go through that research. And we did. And we looked at a number of cities from your Chandigarhs to your Cochins to your Jaipurs to your Vizags. And we looked at a number of these and we mapped on a number of elements. So we looked at schooling, we looked at travel, we looked at cost of living, we looked at art and culture, commute. A lot of these things became elements that we looked at.
Internet service provider?
Absolutely. Actually, Goa was under risk of not being approved for that reason, but we realized just the 6 months prior to us considering Goa, 100 megs had become sort of the norm. We can still argue about its consistency, but at least they deliver 100 megs when they're working. But all in all, Goa sort of stood the test. There were a couple of locations we were looking in North India, which seemed to polarize South Indians. There were places like Pune and Hyderabad, which were at the cusp of just becoming big cities and having those big city problems. So we ended up in Goa. And to be honest, I think there's a couple of segments where I felt it hasn't been successful, but for the most part, it's been a home run, I'd say. I'll tell you the groups where it doesn't work. There's some really young folks that are looking to socialize a lot, and Goa is in the place where there's a vast number of young people that you can sort of socialize with. Goa is a city where you bring your own folks and you party with them. You don't normally find a lot of folks here. Seasonally, of course, around New Year's, maybe that'll happen, but not for the remaining 11 months of the year. Right? That's one. And then the other one where you sometimes face the challenges where there are professionals where both spouses are working. And if they are to move, then the second spouse struggles to find a job because there aren't a lot of jobs here. It is a small town. There aren't a lot of employers here. So those are a couple of pockets where we've struggled. But for the most part, people are happy. They have more time. They are more productive. They are less stressed. There's a side effect where they're more loyal just because they can't go very many places. But all in all, I'd say it's worked out quite well, if I do say so myself.
With COVID upon us, do you think all the things that we just talked about would kind of apply to working from anywhere?
You mean the benefits of Goa, would they apply elsewhere? Yeah, absolutely. So I was just actually chatting with, I have some friends in Coorg, and they were telling me about these guys who've set up internet in a coffee farm. So people can come work from there, right? So I think you are going to see that more and more people realize that, especially knowledge workers, that they don't all have to be in the city, right? They don't have to be in the same office, right? But so it's definitely possible from a infrastructure, quality of life, these kinds of reasons, right? And even before COVID, we saw so many people like moving here, delivery as an office here, a bunch of others. But the infrastructure and the practicality is not the only thing. You also have your organizational dynamics and the culture and so on, right? So companies are making different choices, but it's definitely feasible. It's definitely feasible.
How is this helping with your manpower? Like, is hiring becoming better, or I'm guessing retention is obviously better, like Varun mentioned. But to get good talent to come in, be it technology, or are Goans coming back to Goa and saying, oh, now I can see 2-3 companies here who I could potentially work with, even though it may not pay me the same, kind of money I would earn in Bangalore or Pune or anywhere else. I still get the opportunity to work closer to home with my parents, whatnot. What are the kind of trends that you see?
So while we moved to Goa, it wasn't that we envisioned our head office in its entirety being Goa, right? So about a third of our people continued to work from Delhi. In fact, for a few months, I was working out of Bombay, for personal reasons. And today, for example, our head of finance works from Bangalore, our head of sales works from Delhi. Technology, we're hiring largely in Hyderabad. Now, many of the people that we've spoken to have actually moved to Goa, and they find it attractive about the company that it's an option for them. Like a head of HR moved from Bombay to Goa because he was sick of Bombay, right? So we are able to attract more talent in some case, but I think the bigger impact has been we actually now have access to a pan-India talent pool because with 27 locations we were already building that muscle of working remotely, right? So earlier this year, we made these decisions about sales and tech and so on. Where let's go where the talent is. So I would today consider ourselves hiring on a pan-India level anyway, right? With or without COVID.
A lot of things that I heard during COVID was from other people was how are you talking to your people? How are you managing to get things done internally? And that was a topic that was totally off my mind because we've been doing this for a few years now. So that was not the topic on my mind. The topic on my mind was how the physical safety of people and running of our physical locations, running a business of social collaboration in times of social distancing. Those were the things I was thinking about, not thinking about how do we work, because that's how we've been working. We use video conferencing, we use calls, we're structured, we document things. We don't rely on just sitting next to each other and having that conversation to get things done.
Could you get into a little bit of detail, like how do you guys make remote working happen? Because I'm sure a lot of people are still figuring it out. I mean, they've obviously got the efficiencies up, they've set them better data plans, etc. You talked about documenting better, communicating better. Could you just touch on those four top level items that has worked for you or you guys have learned over the 3 years?
So we've been remote for a while. So the parts that we do quite well are things like scheduling, availability, being inclusive of people who are not in the same office, right? There's a lot of that cultural stuff of, the person in Delhi shouldn't feel like left out because meetings are happening without them, right? I think the degree of ownership, right? If you work remotely, you have to trust the other person, right? That old culture of I'm going to walk around the office and look over your shoulder of what is happening on your screen, right? That you can't do that remotely, right? And if you try to do that with like remote screen capture software and all that, it's just like just stop that. Like either go back to an office or embrace it, right? And with that trust also, by and large, people embrace the ownership, right? And I think that has been one of the things that has helped us as we've grown even in this remote setting, right? So these are the couple of things which I'd say are things that we've done well and we believe in, right? With being inclusive and thinking in a remote way, right? Thinking of, okay, I'm working from home or I'm working in a different city, how would it be? So being considerate. And then this culture of distributed ownership and trust, right? The documentation and some of the things that Varun mentioned it's like an ongoing struggle, right? Where some people do it well, some don't. No one loves documentation, right? That's just human nature, right? And those are things where it's a combination of tools and stuff. So over there, I won't offer any gyan as such. Well, we're still figuring that out ourselves.
Any tools that has really worked for you?
So of the teams that do it well, we use a wiki, we use Confluence, we use ticketing systems. Different departments use different ticket management systems. We use Jira quite heavily on the tech side, which is also a ticketing system, right? And actually, Facebook Workplace is something we installed about a year and a half ago as kind of a social hub, right? So it's not where work happens; it's where a lot of the other social, the water cooler kind of interactions happen, right?
A lot of people have done Facebook Workplace, but have not been able to get much value out of it, right? Because I mean, it seems forced. Come and post on this or comment on that, etc. What's really worked for you there?
So I think what's worked for us is, see. So in fact, I've spoken with other companies, and one of my takeaways was there's no single success, right? You have to define what you're using it for, right? If it's your place where work happens, where you post a document and everyone comments on it, then that's what it's for, and then that culture and that discipline builds, right? In our case, it's more of a social thing, right? Where each city has its own group, and I may not even have access to those groups, right? It's where they can talk, they can chat, they can post stuff of interest. Some of our company level announcements happen there, things like that. So it doesn't have a formal work function. It's not like we document requirements or policies on Facebook Workplace. We make some announcements, but it's largely for person-to-person interaction, right? And that's how it's used. I think the companies where it's where they've struggled is where it's not clear to employees, right? Like it's for work, but it's also for birthdays. So is it a policy that I have to wish you happy birthday on Facebook Workplace, or is it just a friendly thing which I'll do with my own friends? Does HR tell me which groups are allowed and not allowed, or can I make my own groups? These are things that you have to define your purpose first.
Hey, so
wait.
Go ahead.
Anand called me out, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So I run a pure remote team for the longest time. I basically have been running the real estate function, which means finding spaces in various cities. And we've only got the one space in Goa, and we've got 26 spaces in other cities. So my work truly is remote, where there's folks visiting locations, doing due diligence, speaking to landlords, all of that happening. And then I will typically fly in for a closing discussion or a final inspection, but a lot of the work happens remotely. So one of the things that I've consciously done as I built the team was finding people that didn't need that micromanagement, that knew the lay of the land, and that you could tune culture and some level of skills, but you didn't have to build bottoms up. And they were people that, if left to their own devices, would just be playing games on their phone all day. I have hired those types of people too, by the way. So how you hire? Anand touched on this very briefly, but management by output versus management by input. Don't look at how much time they're spending doing what, but you determined what KPIs or outputs they had to produce, and now you're having frequent conversations on what they were able to produce, what they weren't able to produce, what were their challenges, and guiding them through that so that it doesn't replicate. And that conversation is also very it's a nurturing conversation versus an argumentative conversation. I don't know how to explain that well, but you have to adopt that style. Otherwise, they're going to actively avoid your calls. We speak frequently. We would speak as much as scheduled a couple of times a week, and unscheduled, I would make myself available whenever they wanted on whatever medium they wanted. So, especially in their early days where they are figuring out the lay of the land, they've got a million little questions. Just like, I've got this question: do I put it on Workplace? Do I call up somebody in HR, or do I speak to you about it? Just make yourself available for that, right? be that person that can let those little tensions and stresses out of the system. Otherwise, they're going to hold it inside, and long term that leads to lack of performance, or just they fall out of love with the firm and they look elsewhere, right? So that's something that I did. And finally, we did do physical meetings. We would do every 2 or 3 months. We would get all of our folks across the country into one location to build some of this camaraderie, understand each other's, just as people, right? And sometimes that doesn't happen on these calls because it's around an agenda. But when you're there together, there's more time, and you fill that time during meals or after meals where you're talking about other things about your life, and that's where you really get close, right? And this was a trick I actually learned from um, this book about WordPress. It was called The Year Without Pants, if I'm not mistaken. And this, which is a fully remote organization, they said that worked really well for them, something I instituted in my team, and it actually did work quite well. To this day, folks call each other, resolve challenges, and don't always escalate to me. I felt it's built some long lasting bonds that even when they're not in this organization, they will retain. Ha!
You guys raised about $6 million towards your, I guess, plan for the future. That's about 40 to 45 crore rupees for to keep NITI Springboard a going concern. What's the thought process here? What's the plan for the future?
Around March, as we started tracking the virus in other countries, actually, especially Southeast Asia, China, it became quite clear that this is going to be serious. How serious or not, no one knew. How long it would last, etc., also hard to predict, right? So we, so most of March was actually just reacting to things quickly, right? As it spread in India, as the lockdown was announced very abruptly and so on. We had started some preparations a few days before, and just working with that and communicating to our customers and our team and so on. And then so obviously what that meant was we were in almost zero revenue situation almost overnight, right? So cash being precious, one of the so we put together a plan that okay, let's plan for all contingencies. This could last. This was back in March where we said that this could last till December or even longer. Let's build that war chest, and let's do it quickly. And by April, actually, as we started preparing for that, as early as April, we also started seeing that there may be a big opportunity on the other side of this, which was, keep in mind, co-working is like 2% of the commercial real estate market, right? And we were taking a beating in March and still are taking a beating. But the other 98%, those guys have 5-year leases, right? And they have a single office, and now their people have commute problems and, like all kinds of other problems, right? So as early as April, we started also getting a lot of interest around, hey, I want to let my people work from home, but maybe a few days a week they'll need a space where a second place, as Varun called it, right? Starbucks being the third place. So we had this second place kind of remote future planning inquiries coming in. We had people who were working from home, but they need a good internet connection once a week because that's when they do their team meeting, And we had large companies who, unfortunately, in some cases, have also done layoffs or are paying large fixed rentals to, for a conventional office, who are saying, I need flexibility. I can't afford these fixed liabilities in such a dynamic environment. So by April, we had also started seeing this demand of multiple kinds, right? Where in this very volatile world, people were looking for flexibility and options and multiple locations. And they were looking at co-working as being one of those options, right? So, that was the basis for our pitch. We started speaking with a bunch of investors, existing and new. What was also clear quite early within the first month was any new investor naturally would take time, right? They need to do diligence, they need to get comfortable with you, etc. So, in the interest of speed, we went ahead and closed it with our existing investors who already knew and trusted us, right? So, I think this is the fastest raise we've ever done. Took us about a month and a half.
What's the pitch to that? I mean, obviously, you guys have been around for 8 years. You have a growing business. Things are stable. So, I'm not surprised that you were able to close quickly because you're not testing the waters per se. You already established. What is the pitch now? What was saying?
So the pitch was basically there's this opportunity that meets our capability, right? So we have always so some co-working spaces run like traditional offices, right? We have run somewhat unconventionally, where, as I mentioned earlier, about 25% of our members were already remote workers, right? The office I'm sitting in right now, Airbnb's Goa team, which is, I think, 3 to 5 people, they're working out of this office, right? So we're familiar with that. We know how to meet the needs of those companies, whether it's 3 people here and several thousand people all over the world, right? And so those were our capabilities, and we believe this is a trend for the future. And now what we're meeting is this completely unforeseen event, which has, floored the accelerator on this, right? Where, in everything that is, as bad as things have been for the last 3 months, whether it's for our business or for society or whatever, at the other end of this dark period, at the end of the tunnel, we saw that there's this large opportunity, and we could prove that with our pipeline. That we're getting inquiries from these very traditional companies that never would consider remote working, saying, "Hey, I'm considering it now. What can you guys do for me?" Right? So that was the pitch, that we know how to do this, and what we were thinking was a 5-year trend has now happened overnight, right? And as I said, we had conversation with several people who also had the same thesis, and now we're building towards that.
That's kick-ass. I mean, I think you're spot on in terms of saying, okay, how do we capitalize on the situation, and what advantages that you have as a business to take advantage. I think that's a strong enough pitch, right? And I think people want to come along to that, right? You said traditional businesses. What do you mean by traditional here? Is it in the style of working, or is it in style of operating?
Yeah, I think in the what I mean by the traditional business is this. What's the word people use? The promoter-led business, right? Which is, I think there has been a culture which has been changing of very tight management controls, right? Of you have to come to the office in part because we need to keep an eye on you, right?
You check in at 9 a.m. and you should leave at 5 p.m.
Yeah, so some of those things. Exactly, right? And this is not actually unique to India. It's this has been the paradigm of management that started in the factories a century ago. That work is an industrial process where you have to manage the machines. And it's been changing, right? A lot of the new stuff around giving people freedom and so on. So we have to recognize it's relatively new. It's even for places which we consider more liberal, it's only happened in the last decade or so, right? And that change is linked to the workspace as well, right? Because your environment is one way of controlling, right? So I think that's where we felt like that change would take still a decade or so to happen in our market. And it's now suddenly happening very suddenly.
It has accelerated. I think a lot of businesses have found that acceleration, right? I mean, we learn a lot about these scenarios in books, right? We're saying you need to be at the right place at the right time, and you need to be in the right business at the right time. And a lot of the time it's just that you're probably in the right business, and you just need to persist and stay in that business until other things kind of fall into place. I think it's just a story of that. I think what's interesting is you're actually saying that co-working will actually benefit from this rather than not benefit from it. Is that what I'm hearing? Because I would imagine the general thinking or mentality would be the other way, saying you're actually going to struggle because people don't want to go into the office today.
Yeah. And they don't. So, okay, I'll put it this way. I'm short-term pessimistic and long-term optimistic. Right?
Maybe Sorry, go ahead, Anand.
So for the next few months, I think we're in for a very, very tough time, right? We have our work cut out for us. But beyond that, right, if you look, okay, what happens after a vaccine is discovered and rolled out and everyone is vaccinated, right? What does the world look like after that, right? I think that's where my optimism lies.
Two things that our industry really delivers. One is financial flexibility, and the second is in the workplace, this collaboration and ability to battle things like loneliness or to become more productive or to find certain vendors, etc. So all of that. So there's the two things our spaces offer. Now that second piece, people still don't want to do because social distancing, blah, 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 blah. But the first thing people want, because if they were used to taking a large office, making a 3 or 5 year commitment, paying a large deposit, spending crores of rupees, fitting that out, they don't want to do that today. Today, all managements are saying, I want flexibility. I want to reduce my absolute cost. Our industry clearly solves for that even today. That's why our pipelines are full and people are having conversations with us. The second thing that we offer, currently they're agnostic towards, and that's not what's driving this change, but we know that's long term, that's what they need, and that's proven to us. But right now, what's driving this change is people want to reduce their costs, they want more flexibility, they want to reduce their obligations.
Let me give you an analogy. So all these companies have been doing these digital transformations into the cloud for the last 20 years, right? When the 2008 crisis happened, it magically all got accelerated immediately because no one wanted to, like this, where do I cut costs, right? I have these server farms and stuff, right? Let me move to variable pay instead of upfront capex, right? And that same thing is happening even with cloud computing today, right? Amazon, AWS, and Azure are probably doing fantastic business today. And in some ways, we are the AWS of office space, right? We bring that same flexibility to the physical location. Yeah.
So for people who are considering co-working, working from home, I know a lot of founders who have their tech team working from small town than anyone else. What's your suggestion to them, and where do you think 91 Springboard can help?
So honestly, my advice to them is solve for your business, right? That always comes first. It's always been how we've approached any of our customers, right? Where we can help you find your own solutions is that, we have these multiple locations where people can work from home, but as and when they need certain professional infrastructure, whether that's a lease line or whatever, they have access to something that cuts down on their commute time, etc. Right? And for you personally, as a founder or a business unit leader, whatever, we do have a fairly rich community of people you can join where you can find support, right? Especially as a small or mid-sized company, there's a lot going on. People are looking for solutions. I need a lawyer, accountant, freelancer. I need to find some cloud software to replace my older on-premise system. All of these are things where, when I gave that college analogy earlier, I meant it, right? That the people want to help, right? So, we are working on actually fine-tuning the virtual version of our platform. And that is something where I think you'll find 91 Springboard is not just helping you solve infrastructure problems, but also acts as like a support system for you and your business.
No, I'm with Anand on this. I think this is almost a catalytic event. We've wanted to provide a lot of our services virtually, and we've been talking about it for a couple of years. But I think we just got caught up by working in the business and not thinking about the future. And this event is forcing us to do it. I'm glad it's happening. I think it's a need for the hour, and I think we'll be stronger for it. We've always stood for this. Now we're just acting on it.
Awesome, guys. Anand, Varun, thanks for your time. Good luck. Keep doing the good work. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.